So once there's been a sense of establishing familiarisation with the new environment, there's going to be a number of features that accompany that. Firstly, it is going to be the themes of termination, separation and loss. Termination is that the way in which the relationship has been, or relationships have been configured previously, have now stopped, largely. The second feature is that the separation is starting to present and is starting to surface. And that separation is going to be from a sense of familiar, comfortable routine. The separation is going to be from the other party, male or female, who's been left behind. And some huge sadness with that, because despite the fact that they may have been acting out violence, intimidation and so forth, they've still identified as being a family member. They're still loved and cared for. And so this area presents a lot of challenges. It also, of course, is going to present the area or the feature of loss and the sadness associated with that, and what's done with that, both in terms of dealing with little ones individually, depending on what their capacities are, and of course as a grouping. The major second feature that's also going to present to the parent or adult in the household is the sense of getting back out in public, particularly where you might have been in that relationship since you were younger than 20 or in your early 20s. And so, for example, where you've been in the relationship for 15 to 20 years and having been controlled as well, then stepping back out into public is going to be a real challenge. And for those of you who have been controlled in terms of going out of your home, you're going to know exactly what I'm talking about. For some people who are listening to this video who are not familiar or aware with domestic violence, the whole notion of leaving the house or being controlled from leaving the house is a very foreign one. Unfortunately for survivors of domestic violence, it's all too common. And with it there are a range of challenges. Firstly, there's the sense of being comfortable to go out because your routine, the subtext, or the underpinning of it has been that you're so used to being homebound and stopped questioning it a long time ago because it tended to attract the attention of the other party, who would then use that as a means to provoke or intimidate or use other forms of strategies of violence to further control and do further harm. And so I might have considered a long time ago that where I stop doing this, then it'll at least take that dimension of negative attention away out of the house and not only give peace of mind but also convey further protection for children, not having to listen to the arguments or witness further physical violence. And so there's some decisions on the horizon. One of them is in terms of letting your supports know bit by bit that you'd like to go out and sharing that with them as opposed to asking their permission. Secondly is making a list of things that you'd like to go and do and go about and doing them. So it might be a couple of hours at a local library, it might be going to the drugstore, it might be going to the supermarket, to shopping. It might be going to getting involved in some of the events that your children have had at school that you've been prevented from attending in the past. And with that, the other freaky factor of going out once liberated and freed from a situation of domestic violence is coming home, because coming home has often been a crossroad point where there's huge anxiety attached to that. Coming back in the door, being questioned, being interrogated, being asked where you've been and who you've been with and how long you were there and what you did while you were there. And unfortunately, none of those questions have been directed or related or associated with your well-being. They've all been related largely to having a partner who's possessive, controlling, intimidating, and who's case building, who's going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in their own mind and looking for pointers that they can find that meet with their distorted perception of you and how you move in the world. And so by the time they get to the 10th rung on the ladder, you're then getting punched out again because in their mind you've betrayed them, or you've played around with the other person down the road in the context of affairs, all sorts of irrational assertions that they've had going on and case built around that you'll be undoubtedly all too familiar with. And so coming home can be a freaky buzz. It can be a real big deal because there's that anticipation of awkwardness, of starting to feel anxious, of discomfort, and that's all going to fall away. So now not only can you go out and get some practice at doing that, you can also come home and get some practice at doing that and feel relaxed and comfortable before you go out, and relaxed and comfortable when you come home. Probably as a note of caution, without wanting to pat you on the head like a person who doesn't know anything, going out to bars, clubs, places at night time with support people can also be really challenging. And it can be challenging from the perspective that men and or women who use strategies of violence, intimidation and control in relationships can typically identify very quickly your vulnerabilities. And so as much as it might be flattering or charming or having a sense of having your confidence uplifted, having someone come up and start suddenly using one-liners of the day, one of the things that I'd actively encourage you and urge you to do is to get a sense of reclaiming and restoring your own confidence in being out in a number of social situations and contexts and protecting yourself from people who might otherwise be another predator. I don't say that to not encourage you to go out and meet other people and get on with your life. I say it in the context that all too often survivors from domestic violence relationships go out and they quickly fall into a relationship situation and layout that's familiar with where they've been. And it's very easy to do that when there's been a sense of having not felt loved in the relationship for a long time, having felt bullied and intimidated, and having a sense of very compromised confidence, a sense of questioning yourself and not feeling good in the world. And it's natural to want to go out and seek some form of attention or company or comfort or whatever else. Totally natural thing to do. The issue in the middle of that is to ensure that you're cautious and careful about when you do that, for the simple fact that what I wouldn't want to see, your vulnerabilities and the impacts of the violence that's been done to you, simply being repeated by another party who's got a slicker MO, their mode of operandi in terms of approaching you, is sharper than the person you just left, and without realising it, getting engaged and re-involved in yet another violent relationship quickly on the back end of the other one. So it's just about timing. It's about giving yourself the conducive environment that's going to underpin you being able to not only regain and restore a sense of confidence, but also competence. Because you and I haven't been out in a public sense to socialise, etc., for a long time, then it's new. Some of the social behaviours out there are new too. And also how to deal with those, particularly too when there's unsolicited attention that you haven't asked for and don't want, and being okay to deal with that, saying no, or letting the person know that you're not interested. And again, that doesn't sound like too big a deal for people who do, who haven't not done it. It's a big deal when the last time you said no you got punched out, or you simply haven't used the word for a long time because you've been acquiescing or taking a backward stance all the time to the pressure that's been placed on you in the context of the domestic violence in your previous relationship. And so it's really, really important that support people support you, that they don't think it's funny or clever, where they take you out into a bar and introduce you to someone without realising the impact that the violence has had on you, and your inability perhaps to say no, or your inability to broker a conversation with a person who's being pushy or not respecting your boundaries or what's left of them. And so that's really, really important feature, that you communicate with your support people. I've had enough now and I'd really like to go. That you ideally take a number of support people, so that if one person doesn't get it, the other person does. Or in the other vein, that you have got an exit strategy and are okay to leave that environment. So that's the key feature in terms of support and in terms of going out socially, that you're able to broker an exit strategy so that you don't end up in a parallel process, or one that's been aligned with the violence that you've been in and feel stuck or unable to get away, because that in itself can really undermine the development of confidence in terms of going back out again socially and being able to make decisions that have got power in them, they've got meaning to them, and that you can affect in a way that meet your needs big time. And so the going out process for children, for little people, is very similar as well. One of the factors that's often taken for granted in domestic violence relationships is that this huge separation process that occurs within the family system. And little people's routines are undermined because they might go to bed, 5 or 6 year old boy or girl go to bed at night time. There's no good night because tea, the routine of having something to eat, providing there's something to eat, has been undermined. There's no good night story. There's no good night ritual. There's no closure or ending for the day. And so here's a little person in bed and they've got the covers over their head and they're crying themselves to sleep and they're exhausted. And of course that's going to affect them tomorrow at school. It's going to affect their peer relationships. It's going to affect their sense of self-soothing, because the hugs or the cuddles or that form of physical attention and affection isn't being done. And to state it bluntly, their routines are being not only not established, what routine they do have is being hugely sabotaged. And so it's not being done. And as a result, little people are going to go to school tired. They're not going to learn as well, if at all. They're not going to be receptive to feedback because they're too exhausted. And so one of the other key features that occurs in terms of children making contact socially is being able to join a little sports team, being engaged in school activities. And the sports team involvement is absolutely crucial, because often, again, there's a parallel for what you and I learn in our family systems and what we then go out and do in the broader public, in groupings outside of our primary group or family at home, providing we've had a family, of course, for people who are adopted and so forth. That raises other challenges. However, in the context of this discussion, for those who have come from their own family of origin, going outside the gate and becoming part of a sports team can be a really positive thing, because some of the skill sets that are not being learned at home due to the impacts of violence are there in the context of that learning. Cooperating with people, learning to do things together, learning to take instruction that's safe, learning how to share, learning how to be part of a wider or bigger planning process that has a joint or shared outcome at the end of it. I'm thinking winning, to be blunt, in that context, or simply seeing the game through to the end would be good. The other context, of course, of that is both in terms of individual and group participation, whether that be football, whether that be netball, whether that be baseball, softball, tennis, basketball, any of those activities where there's not only an individual pursuit for excellence, there's also a sense of having to work in with other people. Whether that be coaches, whether that be other members of a wider team, whether that be a peers double, in the way in which cooperation, working in with others, listening, communicating, relating are all inherent parts of that wider process. And so encouraging children to get involved in other activities is very, very important as well, because we want to make sure that those skills that they're learning are then generalised out into other areas of their lives later on. Probably the most obvious one is at work, so that little people learn what it is to be part of a team. They learn what it is to contribute their portion to get a bigger project finished. They, of course, learn in terms of routine timeframes. They learn how to get work done on time and how to conclude finishing a project. And so some of the wider implications of domestic violence are absolutely huge, because they undermine little people learning those micro skills that they're going to use later on in terms of other social environments and contexts that at the face value are often taken for granted. And so, and when I say taken for granted, that includes people working in the area, let alone people who are experiencing domestic violence. The subtle ramifications in this area are quite broad. What's important is to address them so that the skill sets that little people haven't learned or aren't learning at home due to the violence are being learned in that other context so that they can be built on and then utilised in other areas in life later on in life. And so the whole development of routines and getting out and becoming part of not only the family fabric but also the social fabric are really, really important goals, and they're really, really important for developing confidence and competence, the ability to do different things. It hasn't been fostered in the environment of violence because there's been too much fallout, because routines have been undermined, because things haven't been finished or completed, both tasks, etc. And to realise too that these things have been done by someone. It's really important to ascribe or to place a sense of ownership over actions. Domestic violence does not happen. Someone does something to someone else or some other people. And the whole happening is an event. In that event, people have made decisions and choices. And it's really important in terms of recovering from domestic violence to foster that ethic of what was my portion, what did I do or not do, as opposed to this happened to me. Because this thinking of this happened to me takes away not only the onus of owning one's own personal knowledge in the sense of responsibility, but also the sense of actually being able to do anything about the violence intergenerationally. Because where these actions are simply happening and there's no agency or no personal relationship between who's doing them, then they don't change, they don't stop. So it's really important to have a sense of this is what you or I are going to do individually, this is what you and I are going to do as a family system, what we're going to do together, this is how we're going to go about doing it. These are some of the skill sets and some of the opportunities I'd like our different children to be exposed to and supported through, so that they not only get different experiences, but they learn a whole range of different micro skills and behaviours about taking part in those experiences. They've actually got an option and choice to later, because we and I don't go and do those things with them. It doesn't occur to them by themselves once they grow up to take part in them or to maintain taking part in them, or for that matter to encourage our little people, their own children, to take part in them either. And so the intergenerational impact of that is further isolation and not knowing or being inclined to be part of a wider community. And so again, over generations, that lends itself to huge isolation, to huge dissatisfaction, to issues around mental health, and also to issues too around being able to cope with some of the factors and features that go on in the wider world outside the front gate. And so this process here, the step that I've been discussing with you, is about being able to say, hey, in terms of specific routines, how do we now go about underwriting routines that promote well-being? How do you and I go about promoting routines that underpin, that inform self-regulation, the ability to have a sense of balancing out well-being and health and lifestyle through putting in place clear boundaries that are defined by time, that are defined by set actions, that are defined by being able to seek conclusions, that things, events, factors that you and I choose to be involved in have got a clearly defined beginning, a clearly defined middle, and a clearly defined end. And so the processes talked about in relation to termination, separation and loss are doing that same feature. They're sort of implying or inferring that the relationships as you and I knew them, as we knew them in our old family situation with the violence, have now terminated. That stopped. The way in which it was configured with the various parties involved has now stopped. And something else is going to be developed out of that. We don't quite know exactly what yet. Secondly, in terms of the separation feature, the ways in which we interact with each other are going to change. Because how you or I, whether it be John or Ariana or Brooke, etc., interacted with the other party, the other parent who's now not there, is going to be different for each of them. The other party's impact has been, or influence has been huge in terms of use of the violence. Now the violence, without those forms of violence, who interacts and how we interact with each other. There are bridgings there that need to be developed. And of course, the loss part is going to be acknowledging, separating from that party who's been left behind in a way that may be quite definitive, in a way that might be defined into the future, and that they don't get interacted with a whole lot at all. Or there's arrangements put through legal processes, family help, community groups, etc., whereby there are consensual arrangements for pick-up and drop-off times later on, once there's an assurance that violence is not going to be used against children, against you or I, etc. And so that's going to reconfigure the way, shape and form in which visitation, contact and sharing each other's lives into the future takes part and takes shape, how that's expressed and acted on. And lastly, the loss feature. And the loss is, I didn't like the violence, I wasn't comfortable with the violence. However, it was closely associated with what was normal for us, what was usual for us. And so there's a loss there in the sense of all being together. There's a loss there in the sense of the connection with the other party who's been left behind. And again, regardless of the gender mix of parents, etc., it'd be heterosexual couple, 2 females, 2 males, the issue in the middle of that is going to be one of siblings in a household often having vastly different stories over time anyway. So in one of the previous videos, there's that issue that older children can leave the house and become part of sports teams, or couch surf, or stay with mates, or go out boarding or flatting, or get away from the physical violence or the other forms of violence in that way, because they've got the social access and the opportunity to do that. For younger children, they may not, of course, being dependent, have those same options or access to them even. And so, remarkably, often in context or situations in family systems where there's been domestic violence, you or I can take 6 family members or 10 family members or 12 family members and line them up from oldest to youngest on a line, and then get each of them to recount what their experience of living in their home was as a child. And the stories sometimes can be remarkably similar over a 20-year period. Over a 25, 30-year period can be remarkably similar. Other times, there have been changes that have been done. All credit to both adult partners in the relationship. They've changed what they do, they've changed how they do it, and the story of the 5 or 6-year-old child they now have is vastly different from the offspring who are now in their late teens or early 20s. And so what's occurred over time is there's a different narrative, there's a different story that's presented in the household, where there's rigid roles and there's been no attempt to change what's done or how it's done in relation to the violence. Unfortunately, those stories can be paralleled and be remarkably similar all the way through. However, whether or not, one of the quite bizarre effects within the household is that those older siblings have literally lived a very, very, very different reality from the younger siblings. And that can be a meeting point, but it can also be a point where lives and points of commonality go off on tangents and veer off from each other. And so it can take quite an effort in terms of reconnecting for siblings to not only develop and cultivate relationships over time, but also to cultivate those relationships, because the experiences have been so markedly different. To the point too that sometimes those older siblings may have simply developed their own lives and they don't come home anymore. And so next generation wise, their children's children don't mix with each other, don't spend time with each other, don't share important cultural, social rituals with each other. And so here again is an example of the extended impacts of family violence. And so in terms of routines, there's quite a bit of material here to consider in terms of developing new routines, but the absolute crucial feature of doing that, so that there are boundaries, so that there's well-being, so that there's a sense of being able to go to bed at night time and end the day and wake up in the morning and begin a new day, from the sense of being able to let things go, from the sense of being able to grieve, and to deal with some very heavy, complex feelings and put them in their place and know that they were there to record those experiences, but we still need those feelings to do other things in our lives. And also from the sense too of being able to gain and reclaim both confidence and competence, of knowing how to go out beyond the house, of feeling confident to join social groupings and social pursuits and hobbies and interest areas where the opportunity wasn't there to do that before, and to engage and have, for adult parents, that you've had the opportunity to go out and engage some of the things that you've wanted to do a long time ago but never had the opportunity, the confidence or the ability to go out and do because you were prevented from doing so. And so it's time to be brave, it's time to embrace those opportunities, and it's in time to identify what those things are, but also too how to go about doing them and the forms of help and support you might need in terms of brokering that and bringing that about. And so in terms of routines and in terms of developing the next steps socially for family systems, all these areas here are very important to engage and talk about with each other, in the sense of those things that are going to be perhaps done individually depending on the age and gender and ability of a lot of people to make those decisions, but also too as a family grouping as well, where rituals aren't going to be interrupted by fighting or by assaults, etc. Where birthdays and whatever else is celebrated in the house, providing they're celebrated in the house at all, and whatever the ritual events are that are given a chord in terms of cultural, religious beliefs and practices, that they aren't interrupted. They're able to be fully put in place, contributed to, participated in, and celebrated.